Shalom to all. My name is Rabbi Sivan Mas, and I'm the Dean of IISHJ Tmura Israel, greeting you from Jerusalem. With a deep sense of obligation to generations past, we have formed a partnership between the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism Tmura in Israel and the Institute in North America, together with the Society for Humanistic Judaism, to take part in the Israel Holocaust Day commemoration lecture series. As humanists, we are committed to combating racism wherever it appears and to instilling a rich culture founded on the principles of respect for human dignity, freedom, and equality. In this series, Committed to Memory, Holocaust Day 2020, we have invited graduates and current fellows of Tmura to share ideas. We're especially honored today to hear from Professor Yehuda Bauer, one of the founding members of the Israeli and North American Secular Humanistic Institutes. Together with Rabbi Sherwin T. Wine, Professor Yaakov Malkin, Supreme Court Judge Chaim Cohen, and other distinguished scholars and visionaries. I would like to personally thank Mr. Paul Golan, who is the director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and Dr. Rabbi Adam Shalom, who is the dean of our Secular Humanist Institute in North America, on putting together this meaningful partnership today. Together with their respective leadership, the presidents of their organizations, their boards and staff. Yehuda Bauer is an Israeli historian and scholar of the Holocaust. He's a professor of Holocaust studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He was also awarded the Israel Prize for History of the Jewish People. He was elected a member of the Israel Academy of Science and Humanities. In addition, he currently serves as the academic advisor to Yad Vashem, academic advisor to the Task Force for International Cooperation on Holocaust Education, Remembrance and Research, and senior advisor to the Swedish government on the International Forum on Genocide Prevention. Thank you, Professor Bauer, for being with us here today. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. So thanks very much for having me, and thanks to Sivan and Guy and all the people who are involved in it. Now, it's quite clear, I think, to everyone that the corona pandemic has moved all the other issues into the background. This does not mean that racism and discrimination and so on have sort of disappeared. No, quite the contrary. But they don't occupy the public space that they did before. And especially in the United States, you have a development of anti-Chinese racism, which again is nothing new, actually, because discrimination against Asians, and from the 19th century on, actually, against the Chinese in America, was something that was part of the public domain. Now, today, of course, for Trump, this is a problem because he depends on China for a great deal of support, also in combating the corona pandemic, but also generally speaking from an economic point of view. But on the other hand, it's a wonderful means of gaining attention and support from parts of the American public. So you have that there. Within that, the emphasis that one could have put and did put before the outbreak of the pandemic on anti-Jewish events and attitudes and so on and so forth. It's something that is going to reappear again once the pandemic is somehow either defeated or over, or has done its damage and slowly disappeared. This is not true of the rest of the world, because especially for radical Islam, and one has to make a clear difference between Islam and radical Islam, because radical Islam is a mutation of Islam, just as Nazism was a mutation of Anti-Semitism. And in radical Islam, today, in parts of the modern world, the Jews are being accused of causing the coronavirus. And this is gaining ground quite considerably. Let me, because of the limit of time, let me quote just one case, very recent one, of a very well-known Jordanese journalist called Asad al-Zuni, who on a website called Dunya al-Watan, the world of the nation, on March 16, 2020. So it's public. Said the following: this virus, referring to the coronavirus, of course, is surely the outcome of the Jews' secret hatred for the entire world. When the Jews ignited the conflagration of World War I, they won the Balfour Declaration. And when they started the conflagration of World War II, they won the establishment of their Khazar colony in Palestine. You have to remember that the anti-Semites claim that Israeli Jews are not really Jews, but descendants of the Tatar Khazars. Now, he says, they want to start a conflagration of a third world war in order to declare the establishment of the greater kingdom of Israel. In other words, there's a repeat here of a old story. If we take the Black Plague of 1348, for instance, where the Jews were accused of causing the plague by poisoning the wells, and there was a tremendous anti-Jewish persecution all over Europe, with a huge proportion of the local population being killed by the plague. And by the way, the plague, peculiarly enough or not peculiarly enough, came from China with a ship that landed in Genoa in 1348, and from there the thing spread. It's not a Chinese virus. It's a virus that was transmitted by rats in a ship that came from China. And you have the same kind of thing repeating itself. In the 17th century, another very major plague hit Western Europe. And again, Jews were accused of causing it. So this is nothing new, really. But it's tremendously dangerous because, of course, this is sort of spreading. And you do have some racist, white supremacist websites in the United States that repeat this. Of course, these websites at the moment are marginal because everybody is concerned with what is happening with the pandemic. But you see, this is anti-Semitism here is part of an inbuilt situation where the developed world, not the polytheistic world, but a so-called monotheistic world, goes to something which has existed in it from before Christianity. Now, I think one has to realize that when we talk about monotheistic societies, in other words, societies in which the ideology, the religious ideology, was either Christian, originally Jewish, Christian, and later on Muslim. We are not really dealing with monotheism. There is no such thing as monotheism, because in Judaism, there's no monotheism. It's not only did it develop from a polytheistic concept, But in Judaism, you have Satan, the counter-god, and you have lots of angels floating around everywhere. So there's no monotheism there. The same applies to Islam. In Islam, you have Satan, the counter-god. And again, with the same kind, even with the same names of angels who dictated to Muhammad the Quran. And of course, in Christianity, which is clearly a religion with quite a number of gods, whether it's a trinity or whether it's Satan and angels and so on and so forth. So we are not dealing with real monotheism as people understand it. We are dealing with a complicated concept, ideological concept that developed in the civilization originally in the Middle East and then in what developed into the Western world. Not in polytheism. In polytheism, there was never any anti-Semitism, because for a polytheistic culture, there were many gods, and Jehovah was just one of them. And the fact that the Jewish minority, and there were very important Jewish minorities both in China and in India, worshipped some god that was called Jehovah, and they couldn't and was not represented by statues. Well, okay, fine. So you have a god that's not represented by statues, and he comes along with a large number of other gods. And I'll never forget a brilliant young Indian engineer who asked me, who is your god? And I had a bit of a problem with that. So I said, my ancestors worshipped Jehovah. He said, wonderful. My ancestor worshipped Ram. And that was the end of it. There was no problem. So in polytheism, and that's the majority of the people in the world, in polytheism, you either don't have anti-Semitism at all, even when there are Jews there, or you have anti-Semitism on the margin imported from Christian and modern societies. In Japan, for instance, you have on the margins of the small Christian minority, part of that minority adopting anti-Semitic slogans. But another part of that same small Christian minority in Japan is radically pro-Jewish. So you can say that there's no real anti-Semitism anywhere in a polytheistic world. So we are dealing with something that is limited, if you like, to societies that developed from this concept of a half monotheistic civilization. Now, originally, I think one has to realize that that when you ask where does anti-Semitism come from, it comes from the Hellenistic world, pre-Christian world, because in the Hellenistic world, the Hellenistic kings wanted to unite all of their subjects in one civilization. It didn't matter what names you gave to the gods, but they were basically the same gods representing forces of nature and so on. And then there was the king who was God. Now, the development of Jewish civilization was different. It started from the same kind of polytheism as all the other civilizations around it. But after a long internal struggle, it developed into something that saw the tribal Jewish God as simultaneously a universal God who could not be seen and who could have certainly no statues, and certainly no king or no human could represent God. And therefore, this clash between the Hellenistic society and the Jewish society was something very real. You have it actually in the Bible, in the scroll of Esther. which is supposedly anti-Persian. But of course we know that the Persians were the only major power in the ancient world that were radically pro-Jewish. And when the king of Persia sent Nehemiah to Jerusalem to build the walls of Jerusalem to re-establish some kind of a small Jewish autonomy, who was that king? In Persian, he was called Shayarsha. In Aramaic, he was called Ahasuerus. So it was this Ahasuerus who supported the Jews. Now, everybody who read the scroll of Esther under the Hellenistic kings knew that this was an allegory. It wasn't the Persians who were being attacked there. It was a Hellenistic society. And it was a Hellenistic society that really clashed with the Jewish traditions, with the developing Jewish traditions. And then you have Christianity and Islam developing after that. Now, when you have this kind of a development, why the Jews? Why not all men with red hair and all women with green eyes? Why the Jews? And the reason was that the Jews had a different kind of civilization which they stuck to. And it was neither better nor worse, but it was different. Now, not everywhere was there anti-Semitism, in either the Christian world or the Muslim world. But yes, there was a lot of it, occasionally, when you needed a scapegoat, and the scapegoating became very, very clear. So this kind of a basic latent anti-Semitism in Christian and later Muslim societies is something that became part of the Western civilization. A major Tel Aviv social scientist, historian, her name is Shulamit Volkov, defined it as a part of a Western civilization. It's part of a civilization. It's not something that can be fought like any kind of an ideology, an ordinary ideology. It's part of a civilizational aspect. Now, it was not all pervasive. There were certainly cases in which Christian societies and Muslim societies developed where there was no anti-Semitism at all. In Christian societies, for instance, in the Caucasus, in Georgia, where Jewish groups settled probably some 2,000 years ago, there was never any anti-Semitism, because the Jews there were simply part of a field of groups, each of which had its own particular ideology and civilization and so on and so forth. There was never an anti-Semitic movement in Georgia. There were individual anti-Semites. One of them is very well known. His name was Yosef Vissarionovich Jogashvili, better known as Stalin. But that was an individual, not a movement. Now you have the same in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the Jews came late as a result of the struggle for independence of the Dutch, and they accepted a small Jewish group. Again, there was never any organized anti-Semitism in the Netherlands. There were individual anti-Semites, yes. But even the Nazi party in the Netherlands accepted Jews as members of the Nazi party and was therefore accused by the German Nazis of not being real Nazis. In 1939, the Dutch Nazi party contained 7 Jews, open Jews. So there was no this kind of basic anti-Semitism that you find in many other places. So it's not everywhere, but it's there. It's part of the civilization. Now, on the basis of this anti-Semitism, you have the development in early modern times of ethnicity and then nationalism. And the nationalism closed in, and And the Jews were outside of it. They were not part of it. They couldn't be part of it. They were not French or Poles or Germans or Italians and so on and so forth. They were something else. And then nationalism became racism. And anti-Semitism mutated into a political movement, National Socialist Nazi anti-Semitism, which is both a continuation of the old anti-Semitism and a mutation of it. And this Nazi anti-Semitism is really repeating, if you look at the propaganda of the Nazis, it's repeating medieval attitudes, medieval stories in detail. There's nothing new in the actual accusations of the Nazis against the Jews. So you have this basic latent anti-Semitism that can develop into mass murder, that can develop, it doesn't have to, but it can develop into mass murder. Now, that's the basis of modern contemporary anti-Semitism in the West, in Christian and Muslim societies. But the most recent development of the past few years added something new, or seemingly new. Now, one has to realize that we are one race. The human race, there are no races. All humans originally come from East Africa, some 300,000 years ago. And today, a chieftain in Papua New Guinea who manages to win the heart of a lady professor in Michigan, they will produce healthy children because we are one race. So this is the, one has to realize that when we talk about races, we are talking about something that is a human invention. It doesn't really exist. And the human race is a wandering race. It wanders all the time. One doesn't have to talk to Americans about that. I mean, America is a product of migration, mass migration. From before the coming of the Europeans. Mass migrations originally of Indian societies, and then the addition of Europeans and others who come and settle the country, conquer it, causing the genocide of the local American Indians and the slavery of the blacks. And in this kind of a migration society, you have in many places, the reaction of the original locals who are against it, obviously, because it changes their society, their culture, their structures, and so on. And in modern times, contemporary times, the migrations are massive. From Latin America to North America, from Africa, the Middle East, and the Ukraine to Europe, mass migrations of tremendous numbers. Now, where does this come from? Why? And the reason has nothing to do with Jews. The reason is the decline in the birth rate. Now, why does the birth rate decline? Because the societies are relatively successful, relatively the standard of living is rising, so there are less children. And before the corona pandemic struck, you have a decline in the birth rate all over the developed world. China, Japan, Russia, Europe, all over. The minimum number of children per woman that will keep a society going demographically is 2.1 children per woman. But in all these countries, China, Japan, Russia, Europe, the number is somewhere between 1.6 and 1.9 children per woman. In other words, less or sometimes very much less, as in Italy, 1.4 children per woman. In other words, a decline in the population. Now, in America, in the United States, it's 1.6 In China, it's 1.6. In Japan, it's 1.3, 1.4. In Italy, it's 1.4. In Russia, it's 1.6. In Sweden, it's 1.9. In the United Kingdom, it's 1.8, but in England and Wales, it's 1.7. The one exception of all developed societies, peculiarly enough, is Israel, where the average, the birth rate is 3.1. And my demographic friends, whom I ask, what is the explanation, come up with very complicated graphs and so on. In other words, they don't have a clue where it comes from. But ignoring Israel for a moment, you have this decline of the population, which means that there's an aging of the population, which means that you need to have immigration, otherwise your standard of living is going to decline. Now, this is essential. This is inescapable. It cannot be helped. Now, it can be organized. It can be controlled up to a certain point. It can be limited, perhaps, but it cannot be stopped. When Angela Merkel in Europe accepted close to 1 million immigrants, she knew exactly what she was doing because the figures were very clear to her. If you don't have immigration to Germany, there will not be enough workers to keep up the standard of living. It's as simple as that. Where do these people come from? I already said it. In America, they come from Mesoamerica, basically, and Central America, also from the northern part of South America, where there is a tremendous rise in population, along with poverty, along with political, very basic political issues, along with a decline in the economic structures of these countries that are basically the result of neoliberalism, capitalist neoliberalism. And the result is a tremendous pressure on the United States and Canada to accept, especially mostly on the United States, that have to accept these immigrants. In America today, in North America, in the United States, if you discount the so-called illegal immigrants, you don't have agriculture. You don't have people to work. You can't afford it. Now you can react to it. And people, of course, react to these kinds of immigration. By how do they react? By increase in nationalism. We don't want these immigrants. They change our culture. They destroy our civilization. They introduce foreign elements. In America, in North America, the Hispanics and the blacks and the Asians, everybody knows that, are going to be the majority of the population. So of course you have a nationalism arising, a violent nationalism against immigrants. Of course you have it in Western and Central and Eastern Europe, violent nationalism. Now somebody is responsible for this. Somebody caused this, didn't they? And for many, not everywhere, not always, not in all societies, but in many societies, you will have the scapegoat there already. It's the latent anti-Semitism that is there. You see it so clearly in countries like Poland and Hungary and Lithuania. But you can see it elsewhere as well. You can see it in the rise of the radical right in Germany, for instance, of the AfD, the radical right-wing party. Now, supposedly, they love Israel. They love Israel, especially the Israel of Netanyahu, the nationalist Israel. But Jews, not so much. Jews are a problem. They caused all this, didn't they? They are responsible. And you have the same thing everywhere. In liberal Sweden, I know Sweden very well. You have the fascist Democratic Party, that's what it's called there. the fascist Democratic Party. The Democratic Party in Sweden is anti-Semitic. Clearly, who is responsible for all this stuff? Somebody's responsible, aren't they? And so you have the Jews responsible. Again, this is not everywhere. It is in many places. What do you do about it? So you have your Anti-Defamation League in America, the American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, and so on and so forth. They argue, look, we are so wonderful, we Jews, right? We've contributed so many Nobel Prize winners. Who cares? Who cares? We contributed to the culture of America, of Europe, of everyone. Who cares? Who cares? This is the kind of defensive attitude that is absolutely useless. Jews are a tiny minority in the world. They are between 13 and 14 million people. It depends who counts and who statistics you depend on. You know, Mark Twain said, there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. So it depends. But between 13 and 14 million, say, among millions of people all over the world, Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. Out of the question. We need allies. Allies who realize that anti-Semitism eats the societies in which it develops. And it does. Anti-Semitism was a major ideology within Nazism. It caused, in part at least, World War II. And World War II in Europe alone caused 29 million victims, non-Jews, apart from the Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. And they died in part because of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is destructive, not just of Jews. Forget the Jews. There's so few of them. Anti-Semitism is destructive of the societies in which it develops. It is a danger to the civilization that tries to develop a kind of a coexistence with each other. And I think there lies the answer. You have to attack anti-Semites, not because of what they do to the Jews. That's self-understood. Of course you have to defend the Jewish people, certainly. But your major theme of countering anti-Semitism is to say to the anti-Semites, you destroy your society. You destroy America, not just the Jews of America, but America. You destroy Canada. You destroy France. Now, the ADL and the Jewish Community Congress and so on and so forth, they don't realize that. They are very nice people. I know them personally. They are very nice people. But totally useless. Totally useless. And the way to do this, in my view, is to ally ourselves with non-Jews who realize this. Equally, I give you one example, because I have to finish my lecture. It's too long already. One example. If 100 years ago, somebody would have said that the closest ally in the non-Jewish world in fighting anti-Semitism is the Vatican, you would be sent to a mental institute. If you would have said 100 years ago that a central group within the Vatican who attacks anti-Semitism are the Jesuits, you would be sent straight away to a closed colony. And that is the fact today. Because of the Holocaust, there was a radical change in the attitude of the Catholic Church and in its wake of some of the Protestant churches. And The Catholic, not each Catholic church in the various countries, not the Catholic church in Poland, not the Catholic church in Hungary, not the Catholic church in some other places, but the Vatican has a clear anti-Semitic attitude because the anti-Semitism attacks the basis on which the ideology of the Catholic Church rests. And the leaders in this are the Jesuits, believe it or not. It took a lot of persuasion for some of us to realize that. But we met with these people. We realized that they are serious, not because they love Jews, but because they love themselves. And they are willing, and they do act as far as they can, with the Pope, Franciscus, who is a Jesuit. His closest friend is a conservative rabbi in Argentina. And there are these people. He may not be, I don't know, your cup of tea, but he's certainly serious. He's certainly genuine. Not everybody is. Not everybody is. Not even in the Vatican. But there you have an ally who is willing to go out and fight anti-Semitism because of their own interest, basically speaking. And the same applies to some other groups. You cannot say that this is a question of politics, right-wing against left-wing. The major leader of fighting against anti-Semitism in the political world in Europe today is Angela Merkel, who is a conservative. The CDU is a conservative party. Anti-Semitism is something that pervaded the Labour Party in Britain with Jeremy Corbyn. This is not right against that. This is liberalism, fighting for coexistence, fighting for a world in which Jews along with others can exist. That, I think, is a basis for understanding what anti-Semitism means today in a world of a corona pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Yehuda. This was a wonderful lecture. Thank you very, very much. We're all clapping silently in our little screens. What I suggest is that if people would like to ask questions, please write it up in the chat, and we will see how we can get the answers for you, because we have to finish. I've been getting some emails and requests to finish today. So I would like to thank Professor Bauer very much, and all our technical helpers that enabled us to continue. And we promise to send anyone who registered with an email, we will send you a link to the recording of this and the previous lecture as well. So thank you very much. Please all stay healthy, and we will be in touch with you in our next programs. Thank you.
Okay, should I leave the? Yeah?
Yes, you can leave the meeting, and thank you very, very much.
חשבתי שיש מקום לשאלות, אני רשמתי כאן משהו לפרופסור באואר.
Yeah, I saw some of these.
אנחנו נשמור את השאלות, אנחנו נעביר אותם, ונוכל לפרסם אותם באימיילים המשותפים יותר מאוחר. פשוט זה נעשה מאוחר לאנשים שרצו לפרוש, ואין להם לא נעים.
את לא רוצה שאני עכשיו.
People who want to stay on, if you, Professor Bauer, are willing to answer some questions, it will be fine with us. But don't feel uncomfortable, people that have to leave. You are welcome to leave. None of us will be offended.
Okay, I'll answer some of the things that I saw here.
Go ahead. Thank you.
I was asked a question about the evangelicals. The evangelicals are the kind of ideological movement that is extremely dangerous to the Jews, because they are in favor of the Jews being a part of their theology. We are tools in their hands, as far as they can see. When with the second coming of Jesus, most Jews will be killed, and the rest will move up to heaven and be convert to Christianity and be part of the 1,000 years kingdom of Jesus. So no, this is not anti-Semitism. This is actually a kind of theological anti-Semitism, which is extremely dangerous. I saw some other questions. Can you put them again, because they just... Do you think the Jewish community in the United States understands the seriousness? I don't think so. I think the reaction of the Jewish community is understandable, because they see themselves threatened. So the immediate reaction is get more police officers to defend, to protect our synagogues and meeting places and so on. But that's totally useless, because you can't protect everyone. And in any case, not to have a policeman supporting or protecting everything you do in the United States. So that's totally useless. Any other questions?
יש כתבתי בעברית, אתה רואה אותה?
There was a question about, no, can you say what your question was, Lily?
אני רציתי שוב, כי אני חושבת שהוא לא רואה את זה כשזה למטה. דקה, אני מדביקה אותה שוב.
לילי, תקראי את השאלה פשוט, והוא יעבור לאנגלית.
נטיות פוליטיות משפיעות על המחקר בעיקר בניסיונות מה?
לניסיונות לאחש אנטישמיות לכל מה שקרה בשנות סוף ה-40 וה-50 ביציאת יהודי המזרח וצפון אפריקה לישראל כללית, אבל ספציפית לייחס את היציאה של יהודי עיראק בשנות ה-50 ו-51, ויותר מזה, הפרהוד בשנת 42, בחג השבועות. הנטייה היום קצת באוניברסיטת בר אילן, יש שם איזו גישה, מכון חדש, שמאוד טוען שמה שקרה שם זה אנטישמיות. יש שם מכון...
Yes, I was asked here, I'm talking in English because there are so many friends from the United States. The use of the term anti-Semitism for things that are not really anti-Semitic. Now, as far as for instance, the case of the Farhud in Iraq is concerned, in June 1941, when there was a major pogrom against the Jews, that was clearly anti-Semitic. There is no doubt about that. One can follow this very clearly because the people who ignited that pogrom were the Mufti of Jerusalem, who was sitting in Baghdad at the time. And it was he, together with the pro-Nazi Prime Minister of Iraq, Rashid Ali al-Kilani, who initiated that pogrom. So, yes, that was definitely anti-Semitism. The same applies to the exodus of the Iraqi Jews in 1951, because there was absolutely no reason for the nationalist government in Iraq to expel the Jews. They were part of the Iraqi society and were integrated and so on. The reason was that they opposed the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine. And therefore they they attacked the Jews. So again, this is clearly anti-Semitism. But when you attack any kind of opposition to Israel today as anti-Semitism, is obviously not true. It's a use of the term of anti-Semitism for clearly political purposes. So one has to differentiate very clearly. And it is not easy to differentiate that because they are sort of marginal cases. The borderlines are sometimes very fuzzy. For instance, there is a black South African professor in Pretoria today. His name is Mbembe, who attacks Israel for its policies on the West Bank. And in Germany, not Jews, in Germany, Germans called him an anti-Semite. And I came out and said, look, I may not like his policies, but it's not anti-Semitism at all. It's an opposition to Israeli policies. And if you call every opposition to Israeli policies on the West Bank anti-Semitism, then about 30% of all Israeli Jews are anti-Semites. So there's no point in that. But the same Professor Mbembe also supported BDS, the boycott movement against Israel. And the boycott movement against Israel is not just against the West Bank. It argues very clearly against the existence of a Jewish state. Now that's anti-Semitism. But did he actually do that? Did he actually say that? And I say before I go and make a big noise and condemn somebody, I want to be quite sure that I know what I'm talking about. So one has to be very careful.
Professor Bauer, can you explain why anti-Semitism is bad for the Catholic Church?
Yes, very easy. Because Jesus was a Jew. And Jesuit theology today is that because Jesus was Jewish, and he said quite clearly, as far as the Gospels are concerned, that he did not come to say something new, but to repeat something that was in the Jewish tradition. You cannot attack Jews as such, of being sort of people who have to be condemned. And they went back to the Gospels themselves, and they said very clearly, and I think correctly, that Jesus was executed by the Romans, because the Romans saw in him a dangerous rebel against the Roman rule in Palestine. So
this was the theology always. So what changed? What made them change their attitude?
The Holocaust. The two individuals in the Catholic Church who caused this change. One of them was Angelo Roncalli, who was the nuncius, the apostolic nuncius, the diplomatic representative of the Vatican in Istanbul during the war. And he had contact with Jewish people there. Angelo Roncalli was an Italian peasant, very brilliant man. And he arrived at the conclusion that I just said. And the second person was a German Catholic theologian, Augustin Bea, B-E-A, who in the Vatican developed writings that repeated what I just said. And slowly, over a period of a number of years, Roncalli and Bea changed the attitude of the church. Roncalli became Pope John the 23rd in 1958, and he initiated the Vatican Council of 1965, which was then continued after his death, and arrived at the conclusions that I just said.
Thank you very much. We really need to conclude now.
I'm leaving you.
לילה טוב, יהודה. Good night, יהודה. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day for those of you that it's still daylight. לילה טוב. Good night. Thank you. See you in the next program. Bye-bye.